Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Walker here with the B2SMB Institute, and I am pleased to have our first speaker that we've ever had from HubSpot, and that's Mr. Scott Brinker, who is the VP of Platform Ecosystem, which is a really just about the coolest title I've heard in a long time. Welcome, Scott. It's good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great. I'm excited not just to talk to you about your role at HubSpot and what you see from there, but you're also involved with an organization called MarTech. So as you introduce yourself, please give us some background, the 411 on you. I think we're all familiar with HubSpot. It'd be great to hear what current state of HubSpot is, but really talk to us about the MarTech organization and kind of what really gets you excited about the whole MarTech space.
Sure. Well, I've kind of like had my entire career with one foot in marketing and one foot in technology. I was a SaaS entrepreneur at one point, creating a platform for marketers to do interactive content. And one of the things I'm sure everyone in marketing knows is the challenges that we faced over the years of, on one hand, all these great tools, and on the other hand, how do we get them to work together?
Right,
And
right.
so that was actually the mission I joined HubSpot for about 3 years ago. Was helping them become more of a true platform and making it easier for us to work with other app creators in the
Mm-hmm.
sales and MarTech space to better integrate. And then, my own passion for this stuff, about 13 years ago, I started a blog called chiefmartech.com, which for many years was this extremely small audience of like my family and 5 people of like, hey, what about technology people working in marketing? And it was just crickets. After around 2013 or so, it really took on a life of its own. I mean, this intersection we now all live in,
Mm-hmm.
of how marketing really leverages technology to execute its mission. It's become a seriously cool thing. So I work with a group that produces the MarTech Conference here in the US. Generally find myself between the work I do at HubSpot and, Chief MarTech, it's kind of like 24/7 MarTech, which means I am probably the least interesting person you will ever talk to, unless you're interested in MarTech.
Well, you might be the most interesting people that I talk to because I absolutely, like you, I live and breathe MarTech. I mean, my background is marketing. I always like to believe I took a technology point of view. I always wanted a very robust stream of data and facts to make decisions about marketing, which didn't make me too popular with my creative team. But I think it's a noble mission you're on. What are the things that and I'm sure this has evolved over time, but what are the things that you pay attention to in the MarTech sector?
Yeah, wow, that's a deceptively broad question.
Mhm.
Ways we can think about this. So I think there are two things that you really do have to triangulate between. One of them is this rapid evolution of technology innovation. And let's face it, I mean, it's not been slowing down. Some of the advances we've seen, with artificial intelligence that used to be very science fiction-y, we're now seeing things like embedded with, not just machine learning for like detecting patterns, but even some of these like generative AI tools that will do writing for you,
Mhm.
let you like, do creative, masterpieces just with a few words. So there's a lot of technological innovation that you want to keep abreast of, just because this becomes almost the seeds of what's possible. But the other side of it, which I find arguably more fascinating, is the organizational and professional dynamics around this. Because the technology, it's as they say, it's a tool.
Mhm.
In some cases, a very sophisticated tool, but it's a tool. What really matters is how do individual marketers, and more importantly, teams within a business, leverage these technologies to do something amazing. And I would say out of all these years that I've spent, studying MarTech and working with people, it's that organizational side of it, the human side of it, which is really where all the power is. Like if you can't get that to work right, if you can't get that to evolve, frankly, it doesn't really matter what the technology is capable of. You just sort of end up running into roadblocks trying to harness it.
Well, not to make you the skunk at the picnic, but I mean, in the MarTech space, do you think organizations are doing it, are actually organized and are leveraging the technology in such a way that they're getting maximum benefit for it?
Skunk at the picnic. I hadn't heard that one before. I'm going to
I'm
steal
from the
that.
South. We use lots of stuff like that.
So I think the short answer is, well, I'll give the short answer, then I'll explain. The short answer is yes. Pretty much everyone is behind. And that's actually the sort of pathway to sanity, is to recognize it's not just you. I mean, I've for a number of years, I used to draw this graph where I would show like the exponential curve of technology growth. I mean, things like Moore's law in computing, the doubling of computing power more or less every 2 years. I mean, we see time and time again these patterns of technology changing exponentially. Yet I mean, just the basic rudimentary study of like organizational dynamics, organizations don't change exponentially. They change, take your
Slowly.
pick, linearly, perhaps sublinearly, and when you juxtapose these two things, which is sort of the state of modern business, you see this like ever widening gap where the amount of changes that are happening in technology just continue to outpace, what by just normal practices an organization is able to do to keep up. So everybody feels this. I don't know of a single marketer at a small business or a large enterprise, who has sat me down and said, Scott, we've got all figured it out. It's all under control. I'm gonna go grab a beer. We're good. Everyone's like, oh yeah, well, there's this thing happening over here. We're using this product, but we're not sure if we're getting the most value out of it. Everyone is in that situation, and sort of once you acknowledge that, then it becomes this realization. There was that joke anecdote. The two hikers in the woods, and a bear starts to charge them, and the one hiker stops to like put on his tennis shoes, and the other hiker's like, what are you doing? You can't like outrun the bear. And the other hiker's like, well, I just need to outrun you. And that's kind of the situation. And it's like, it's not that any of us are ever going to outrun this just crazy pace of technological innovation.
Right.
But what we can do is we can outrun our competitors, and that's really then where the magic happens.
That's a terrific analogy to describe it, because I don't think we can outrun the bear. I mean, in some ways, do you believe that we're victims of our own success? In other words, organizationally, we're challenged because there's just too many choices, or there's too much to keep up with, and that until we start being better editors of what our MarTech stack looks like, we're going to continue to suffer. I mean, I know a point of view that Jason Finkelstein from Admiral, one of our members, is pretty adamant about. Is look, there's just too many choices, and you need to be, as a leader at least, a good editor of. And you're not always going to be right. You're not going to get every single application spot on right, and it's going to be the ultimate application for whatever it is that you're trying to do. But you at least need to get it to a point where you're committed for more than a period of months, but for a longer period of time, so that you can develop the people to actually use the tools.
Yes. So I was trying to paint that mental picture of the exponential curve of technology and the slow curve of organizational change. And as far as I could tell, there are only two solutions to that. One solution is, okay, well, if you can get your organizational change curve to be just a little bit higher up than your competitors, okay, that's a good advantage. But even that only gets you so far. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is you have to make a decision which things you're going to pull under the curve of stuff that you're actively changing for, and which things You're just not, because
Right.
I think, yeah, if you try and do this mode of just tackling too many of these different opportunities, or you get paralyzed by the choices and, sort of, fail to make any of them, that really is the worst case scenario, because it just, nothing really moves forward. I think it's such a better strategy to say, listen, we've looked at this. We think these two or three things are really going to have the greatest impact for our business, for our customers at the stage we're at. Focus on those and do them really well. And the fact that there's a bunch of other things out there that you could be doing, and
Hmm.
new things that pop up in your alerts every week, that just smile and nod and
Right, right.
uh,
So, we talked earlier about kind of our personal experiences of 2020. I'd like tell us what you think happened to MarTech in 2020. What are some of the things that, for instance, became more important? What are the things that changed? What users changed? Were there more of, less of? Just give us kind of a sense of, if you looked back at 2020 in your role as head of MarTech, what would you say?
Yeah, so I have to preface my answer by just acknowledging, I mean, 2020 sucked for so many people. I mean, it was a really hard year. And yeah, it just, I have a lot of respect, and empathy for what so many people have gone through with this, health crisis and all the other craziness of 2020. But part of why I have to give that preface is because, from the lens of digital business and digital marketing, it was a dramatic catalyst towards accelerating how businesses are actually embracing this. Because, I mean, for not a particularly pleasant reason, it was basically like,
They had to.
you had a gun to your head and it was like, go digital or, go home.
Hmm.
And so a lot of businesses went digital in ways, I mean, even if they had some before, they realized, like, okay, both externally, this becomes really our only lifeline to our customers, to our audience. But then also, even internally, this like forced move to remote working for everybody, really required people to rethink, like, okay, well, what are the tools we do to be able to execute, our work in this more distributed fashion? And so, sorry, I'm going to go back to that mental picture one more time. So for all those years, I had the, exponential technology curve and the sort of linear-ish,
Hmm.
organizational curve. And I just kind of accepted it as like, well, you just, yeah, you kind of just have to live with this. Change is hard. I redrew a version of that, this summer, because I was like, it turns out there are other ways. This is not a law, right? This is a,
Right.
pattern. And what we saw was basically this cataclysmic event, of 2020, actually created this like knee spike in like organizational change,
Hmm.
where, I mean, there were a ton of these articles and research studies of companies basically accelerating their digital transformation by years, in just a matter of weeks or months. Really, no precedent for this, as far as I could tell, in like the history of,
Hmm.
technological adoption. This was massive. And so, yeah, I think coming out of 2020, I mean, we're all hoping, on a number of dimensions, that the world gets more sane. But I think the shift for digital was a catalyst, not just a moment. Like, we have now fundamentally embraced a new level of digital business, both externally and internally, that pretty exciting.
I think I agree. I think it is very exciting. Is it too early to start to designate the sectors of MarTech that are winners and the sectors of MarTech that are going to be laggards in their application as we kind of go forward?
This is a hard question, because for many years I would create this landscape of different MarTech tools, which started with a humble like 150 or so, and over the
And
years,
now it
the
looks like
last,
a Robert Motherwell painting, right?
oh, it's crazy. It was like 8,000 last year. I think I'm still trying to work up the courage to see if I'll do it this year, but if I did, I guarantee you the number would be over 10,000. And so one of the things that's interesting about that is every year when I would publish that, people would ask me like, okay, well, where's the hot innovation and where are sort of the old,
Hmm.
categories, settled and they're done. And every year I'm like, there's not a category here that isn't innovating. And my go-to example would be web content management, website management, digital experience management,
Hmm.
different labels for that category. Is that is arguably the oldest category of MarTech, right? That started
Hmm.
happening in 1994, 1995.
My
So
gosh,
we've
I'm
had
right.
like
Yeah.
26 years
Yeah, you're
of
right.
web content management. If you're going to pick a category and say, okay, this category should be done, it's mature, nothing to see here, move on. Yet you look at that today, that category is on fire. I mean,
Hmm.
all the reinvention that happened around headless CMS, you've got all these no code tools that are like empowering, a much wider, set of people to create web experiences and web apps. Yeah, it's the oldest category in MarTech, and yeah, you could look at it now and say it's one of the hottest ones today. So it's I think it would be hard to just declare winners or losers across the landscape. I think it's going to be evolving across the whole landscape here for many years to come.
So let me ask you an equally unfair question to the last one. Um, if you look at really, uh, let's just divide the world of MarTech users into really two large camps. There's the enterprises of over 500 employees, large brands, large purveyors, large offerings, big customer bases. And then there's, the world of small business, to be defined as under 100 employees, in some cases under 25, but you got the big dogs and the little dogs. Where are they going? Where do you see their emphasis in the landscape of MarTech? Where do you see the emphasis being applied by the large enterprises, and then equally by the where do you see it for the small businesses?
So just making sure I understand, we're talking about companies that are adopting MarTech, whether they're large companies or small
Correct. Not
businesses.
so much
Okay,
the sellers of MarTech.
gotcha.
We'll get to that in a minute, but in the user base, what are the things that frankly could have been uh, driven by the experience of 2020. Just where do you see the emphasis really coming about?
Yeah, so let me try and answer it this way. I believe the current state of MarTech and where it's headed just gives small businesses an absolutely unfair advantage over larger companies because in so many of these categories, there's so much competition with the technology. I mean, we could go into all the economics of what's happening with software development, but I assure you, they're all on this trend of like, it has never been cheaper or easier to build software. So what you've got in all these categories now is, these disruptive players that are coming in. They're, instead of the high-end enterprise sale, they're creating a tool that's designed for normal people to use. They're taking advantage of like what has become good UX practices. It turns out software doesn't have to be, completely awful to use. We can have delightful software. We are starting to learn how to do that, and so folks come in with these tools and they price them in a way that's, often a derivative of their own expenses, which are incredibly low for launching a new SaaS app these days, and so if you're looking at tools in the SMB space, you have just got so many like great tools, priced reasonably. Most of them are like freemium in nature, like you can try it
Hmm.
out, see if it's going to do what you want before you
Hmm.
commit, and it's not that the larger companies don't have access to those tools, but where the competitive differentiation comes in is when you're a larger company. First of all, yeah, you do end up with like, just more administrative related needs and complications there that end up getting you connected into enterprise software that, is just more expensive and more difficult to adopt. But the real competitive differentiation is on the organizational side. I mean, a small business can adopt a tool and they can just start using it. They can just
Right.
start running with
Right.
this. Let's try it. Let's give it a shot. for a lot of large companies, it's still in a mode, even if the tool is right there and they could get it with a credit card. And in theory, they could go live with an experiment that afternoon. A lot of times that doesn't happen. It's like, well, let me get an approval from here, and then I'll run it by procurement, and then the IT team will do their thing. And maybe in 6 months, I'll get to be able to run that one experiment. So again, don't get me wrong, we could look at the other side. There are definitely some advantages, larger businesses are going to bring to this fight. But from just a purely, how do you harness MarTech? I think small businesses have an enormous competitive advantage.
That's a really great observation. And I think that notwithstanding, I'm certain that many small businesses felt forced into their adoption of MarTech and a lot of other digital platforms that covered different areas of their business over the course of 2020. The silver lining may be, look, you guys just gave yourselves, a tool set that makes you significantly more competitive. You just never knew that it was there, or never really believed that it could help you as much as it does. Again, is it still unfair, given that context of really who's doing what, to start to isolate, particularly in the small business category? Where do you think the MarTech winners will be? What are the application winners for small business? Have you really come to any conclusions about shameless plug?
I mean, I'm biased here, but
no, but I think I guess it is a leading question. I mean, is when it comes to small businesses and they can break down the components of marketing into a number of MarTech applications, is really the winner going to be the person who gets the most number of quote applications into a single platform?
I don't know. So, and again, I'm biased on this, but I think my opinion on here is not exclusive to HubSpot. I think this is an industry perspective. I think it is a really hard mission for one company to build it all. It's just, there are just too many things, in the world. There's too much innovation that's still happening around this entire marketing space, new consumer technologies that are going to keep changing the playing field. And so I'm not a particularly strong advocate of, oh, well, if you could just find one product that does everything for you, you're done. Where I think the battle is fought is to say, okay, I want to pick one platform. I want to pick one thing that's going to be my foundation, my system of record, because I don't want, my data, spewed across, half a dozen different silos. But then on that platform, it's a combination of, okay, what's the functionality I get out of the box? Because there's some stuff that's just table stakes now, right? I mean, like, we know we'll be able to do basic, email marketing, we're going to be able to publish a landing page, I mean, there's some table stakes there. But then what I want the option to do is, if I have a very specific need, to be able to go to an ecosystem of apps that are already pre-integrated to that platform. And kind of like I do with my iPhone or Android, like if I want a particular thing and it didn't come out of the box, I can just go and I can get it and plug it in, and it works. I don't have to do a lot of technical engineering to make it work. I really think that's the way, and again, small businesses are probably at an advantage here, because large businesses tend to have, again, just so many legacy systems around. It's actually very hard for them to converge on a single platform. Small businesses, yeah, this is the point in time in their life cycle, pick a core platform, only work with things that you can integrate on that, so you're not in the, enterprise architecture business, and just run with it.
What are some of the hidden barriers, or not so obvious barriers, that you see to the continued trajectory of MarTech? And you can take either large enterprises, small enterprises, or all the above. And I guess the example I would give is, the dirty little secret of almost all SaaS platforms or the last 10 years, particularly as related to small business, was cloud adoption. It's just small businesses did not feel good about surrendering their data or kind of working in the cloud to the level that they were kind of forced to in 2020. Are there other things like that you, as you look out over the future, and say, yeah, we still have to resolve these kind of issues?
That's really interesting. Yeah, and this is where I think I have to be careful. I spend so much of my time talking with perhaps the top quartile of people sort of on the leading edge of this stuff, that there's some of these things I take for granted that you're reminding me I should not take for granted. So for instance, up until this question, if you'd asked me, I would have just sort of like assumed, well, of course, all this stuff's in the cloud. Like, you're like, why wouldn't it be? But yeah, it's a fair point. There's no doubt still a large segment of businesses out there who that just isn't the world they started in. They weren't particularly forced to have to make a change, up until, arguably quite recently. And yeah, now it maybe feels like, okay, this is a big leap. This is going to happen. I don't know though. My argument to them would be like, what isn't in the cloud, as a consumer? Like, look at what you use. I mean, whether it's, like Amazon or Netflix or, like our home security services, or it's just all in there. And I feel like if you're not, like, all those advantages we were talking about earlier, like, oh my God, this cloud software there's just so much competition for small businesses to be able to, like, get the tools that they love most. If you are artificially closing off, well, I don't want to use a cloud tool for that. Yeah, I think you're disadvantaging yourself unfairly. And I really would question, okay, why? Like, what's holding you back there?
Right. I guess the challenge that I would lay out really to all of MarTech players, and you're certainly in a bully pulpit to really kind of advance this, is don't overlook the challenges that particularly small businesses have in their adoption of really great tools, because they have either prejudices or ignorances or frankly deficits in understanding of, here's how I'm going to use this, here's how my data is going to be safe. I always joke that small businesses are this wonderful combination of unbridled optimism. They wouldn't be entrepreneurs if they didn't have it. But they're also the people who will sit around and go, if somebody's going to get hit with ransomware, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
and they will kind of exaggerate in their own minds that just the fact that they're going to get this awful thing rained down on them. And it is a weird combination. But I do think that even in large enterprises, there still exists that kind of barrier of, okay, am I really going to be able to use this? Am I really going to be safe using it? Remember back when they used to say IBM, you never got fired for buying IBM. There are still people who have to make buying decisions and implementation decisions that could cost them their job. So, those are the things that, frankly, as a community, we need to help each other understand.
Yeah, no, I think that is a completely fair point. And also to your point there, yeah, just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean, yeah, every other possible dimension, of what's going to be important to you just magically takes care of itself. I think issues around data management and data privacy and, security of these systems, these are all great questions. And it's absolutely part of the due diligence you should apply when, adopting tools. I guess the trade-off, I would think, for small businesses becomes the risk reward time investment ratio. When you're talking about, a lot of these platforms that have already been adopted by tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of other businesses, you can do an analysis, completely from the ground up, and let's hire a security consultant and get,
Right.
And I don't want to dissuade someone from that if that's what they want to do, but it's like you can spend a lot of time and money on that, and I'm not sure that the incremental assurance that you'll get out of that investment will have been worth it. I think when you get up into larger and larger companies, just because of their scale, the economics of that play out a little bit
Right.
differently, and
Right.
you could argue the stakes in aggregate are higher. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think the thing is, like, so many so many of technologies, long before, like, MarTech and this, it just, yeah, they have multiple dimensions to them, and
Yep.
it's easy to be
A survey of
optimistic about all the
complexity.
good stuff. It can sometimes be hard to see around the corners of, like, okay, you know, what could go wrong? What reasonably could go wrong, and what do I want to do to either prevent that, or is that potential trade-off something I don't even want to engage in?
Fair enough. And I think that I bring it up simply because of the fact that uh, we're just finishing up a really a massive bit of research on small businesses and enterprises that serve them, along with Accenture was our partner in doing this, and discovered that probably the biggest deficit, the biggest gap that exists right now between small businesses and the enterprises that are selling to them, and in many cases, and in many viewers of this segment, I'm sure, are in that MarTech space. They have a MarTech product that they're selling to small businesses. Trust is the number one issue. Do I trust you to understand the problem I'm trying to solve in the first place, understand what my constraints are, understand what my budget is, understand what my fears are, and are you successfully addressing them? But I want to move on to something else, because I'm not going to take one more bite at the apple on who are the winners.
Excellent.
But I am going to ask you: do you think that, given the landscape of logos that you would have created would have been more than 10,000 for 2020, is there a SaaS and particularly a MarTech convergence that is on the horizon? Can the world support a 10,000 square feet of MarTech players? I mean, does it at some point have to really kind of consolidate and really cull the herd?
So I will give you my opinion, with the full disclaimer that there are other viewpoints out there that may end up being correct. I may be completely off base about this, but I would say, how concerned are you about consolidation in the iPhone app market? Because the iPhone App Store has, like, what, 1 million, 2 million apps in it. Like, how much sleep are you losing at night over that? So obviously a bit of a setup. MarTech isn't quite as simple as that.
But that's a great
But
analogy. I never thought of it that way. That's an absolutely perfect analogy.
but I think that's the model I believe will take hold, which is
Mhm.
basically you will have a consolidation of platforms. I mean, I don't know if it'll get down to just two, like iOS and Android, but there will be a finite number of these primary systems that serve as the foundation, for a company's MarTech stack, or probably, I think, more likely what we see is, really the whole front office of marketing, sales, service, sort of converging under, one platform that connects those things together. But then on top of those platforms, I think there is going to be an incredibly rich long tail, of apps that, towards the head of that tail, you will have some very large companies, that are absolute leaders in, like, this is the top platform for influencer marketing, or, this is, the best platform that if you want to manage, like, targeting of advertising, I mean, whatever it is, you go down those things, and some of those companies will be large companies themselves, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, themselves. But then you will go down in this tail of just these highly specialized apps that plug into these platforms. I mean, like the WordPress ecosystem. WordPress, I mean, you could argue is the #1 CMS in the world, right? More websites run WordPress than anything else. There's something like 60,000 plugins that are available for
Mhm.
WordPress. Now, do you consider, I'm not saying all 60,000 of them are great.
They're not.
Probably most are not. And certainly if you were looking at, well, which of those are like, really, businesses that I would invest in, and, very few of them. But the software is still there. And I think that's what you're going to see. And this is actually, again, the same thing you see with iPhone and Android, where, yeah, there are some of the apps, for the iPhone that are, huge businesses of their, in their own right. And then you start to get down to others that, are decent businesses, but they're not going to be the next, unicorn. And then you get into a much longer tail of just these highly specialized things that either a business built just for its customers, or maybe it was, two entrepreneurs in a garage that they came up with something that, if it makes $1 million, they're thrilled. It's amazing for them, but they're not going to, raise venture capital and, take an IPO run. I think that's what we're going to see. And so I do think the number of apps in the broad MarTech world is going to be vast for many, many years. But I think as far as like business decisions of how you pull this stuff together, your choices for platforms are going to become highly consolidated. And the irony of this is the more consolidated the platforms become, I would argue the more likely you have an explosion of specialized apps, because just like it was with the different phone systems, like if you're an app creator and you have to create 20 different integrations to 20 different platforms, that's like a really heavy tax to pay.
Right.
But if you're an app creator and it turns out there's only 1 or 2 or 3 platforms that are your main market where you integrate to, oh my goodness, that's easy. I integrate it, I get into these marketplaces, I start to promote it. I actually think consolidation in platforms will somewhat ironically create a further explosion of specialized apps on top of them.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And to kind of extend the analogy or the comparison to WordPress as a the Institute is a WordPress shop. One of the reasons why my team said we've really got to go with WordPress to build out the functionality that we need for the Institute is not just because of all the plugins that kind of we can use for things like directories and blog entries and surveys and all the rest of that stuff that's easy and off the shelf, but it's this population of WordPress developers that are out there that are legion. there's just ridiculously high number of them, and they're all pretty darn cheap when it really gets right down to it for the level of skill that they bring to it. Do you see in the if I believe you're right, there will be an explosion of kind of MarTech applications. Is there going to be an explosion in the population of people who can assist businesses in the actual application and implementation of MarTech? Because I guess they're there, but you don't go on to Indeed and see legions of them like you do see legions of WordPress developers. Is that a fair question?
I think it is fair. I think it's also interesting to think about like what you need developers for. So websites are like almost one end of the spectrum where you're like buying the website software gets you almost nothing. From an actual like, okay, and now we're ready to do business, right? Okay, what you bought, the canvas and the paints. Someone still needs to sit down and actually create the masterpiece. And so that's just the nature of, websites. And so I think that's one of the reasons why there's this really large market, of creators then that work on those foundations. Versus like, if we take the other end of the spectrum, like, say, just a core CRM system, to be honest, for a lot of businesses, you get a CRM out of the box, a small business, it probably does 90%, 95% of what you want, like particularly if you're just getting started, like it's there, it's great, let's start using this.
Right.
Now as you grow, you will almost certainly want to customize pieces of it or extend in ways, and I think that's where you see there is a developer ecosystem supporting this. But just the demand of like how much customization is development versus how much of it is just configuration,
or ignorance to how to make it work.
different pools.
Right. I'm I don't have an answer to my question, by the way. I have this suspicion that, again, in the underlying barriers to further adoption, particularly for small businesses, is the fear that they won't know what they're doing, and that they don't know where to go when they get trapped in a place where they're stuck and they don't know how to get out of being stuck. And I've never tried to write code. I've never tried to do the things that really I asked many other people to do on my behalf, and thank God. But I think that there's a lot of small businesses who didn't have the luxury of even saying no. I mean, they absolutely needed help to get what they ultimately.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just think for the most part, I almost feel like that's a higher level engagement than even things like, say, WordPress development.
Probably true.
Because yeah, it's I mean, not that there aren't technical elements of configuring the software, that's part of it. But I think you're right. The bigger thing is like, okay, how do we set this up for your business? And it's much more the your business elements to it. That's where all the magic happens. Again, this goes back to the organizational change curve. It's an organizational change essentially.
Right.
And I mean, in all fairness, that is a very large industry. I think we're used to hearing of for larger companies, all the management consultancies, that serve that. When it's smaller businesses, those big brands aren't necessarily, consulting brands aren't necessarily as relevant. But there is a growing ecosystem of smaller consultancies and agencies that serve those businesses. And I have to be careful. I don't think I can give you the exact number because I don't think HubSpot's published it. They might have, but I can say an enormous percentage of HubSpot's sales happens through agencies and services and consulting providers who this is what they do. They work with businesses in those markets, like, okay, well, we'll get you set up with the HubSpot software because that's you need something here to be able to do this. But then
Yes.
a lot of where they're making their money is by, really consulting services, helping to show people how they leverage content marketing.
Right.
How do we get you set up here, for SEO? How do you want to manage the lead flows when they come in to your salespeople? So I know for a fact there's a lot of good business there, and that exactly for the reason you described, it's like these businesses, it's not that they couldn't just call HubSpot and buy the software directly. They could. It's that the software isn't the hurdle. The hurdle is, how do you help me figure out how to really make my business work in this new environment?
Right. Exactly. This has been terrific, Scott. I mean, I can't thank you enough. And how do people learn more about? Well, let's see if we can get you a few more subscribers to to Chief MarTech. How is it? Give us an email address for your newsletter, or is it a blog? Is it a newsletter? How would you describe it?
It's a blog. It's a newsletter. It's
it's all the above.
It's easiest way is if you go to chiefmartech.com.
Okay.
For what it's worth, it's Chief MarTech without the H at the end.
Okay.
I won't. Long story there. And then that is also my ID on Twitter at Chief MarTech without the H. And so feel free to ping me, and happy to chat with folks about this stuff. I say this again and again, but I deeply mean it. There has never been a more exciting time to work in marketing. I mean, the superpowers that are being given to us. It's amazing. And I recognize that's, with great power, great responsibility, there's a lot of stress of just figuring out how do we harness this stuff? How do we take advantage of it? But there's a silver lining to that of, part of why it's a bit overwhelming is because it's so much that people are building expressly for you. It's
no question, no doubt.
It really is. I think the opportunity outweighs the stress. But if you're fretting over it, happy to help any way I can.
Well, listen, as I said, there's a number of MarTech players who are in the B2SMB space who are selling to small businesses. There are a number of marketers who are going to be listening to this who are running very large MarTech stacks inside of big businesses like Dell and Square and Verizon, who I hope are listening to this. So I definitely want to have you back. I definitely want to talk more on this topic as the year evolves and to continue to try and, dig in on the questions of maybe, well, first of all, maybe one day I'll get you to answer the question of who are the winners and who are the losers. But more importantly, okay, what are the challenges? What are the barriers? What are the things that really are important to pay attention to as people are trying to evolve successfully into this incredibly jam-packed space called MarTech? So thank
Sounds
you,
like
Scott
some good
Brinker.
future conversations, my friend.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I appreciate it and look forward to doing this again sometime.
Great. Thank you so much.